There is a moment in every great story where the curtain finally gets pulled back, where everything you thought you knew about someone shifts just slightly, and suddenly the picture becomes something far more interesting than the carefully polished image that was sold to the public for decades. For millions of fans who grew up watching Bonanza, Dan Blocker was Hoss Cartwright, the gentle giant, the big-hearted, slow-grinning son of the Ponderosa who made you feel like everything was going to be okay just by being on screen. But now, decades after his death, his son Dirk has stepped forward to confirm something fans long suspected, that the man behind Hoss was carrying a far more complex, surprising, and deeply human story than anyone ever let on. To understand what Dirk revealed, you first have to go back to the beginning, because Dan Blocker's life didn't start gently, it started with a bang. On December 10, 1928, in DeKalb, Texas, a baby arrived that stopped the room cold. Bobby Dan Davis Blocker came into this world weighing 14 pounds. 14! The nurses and doctors had never seen anything like it, and the small Texas town of DeKalb would be talking about it for years. That birth alone should have told everyone exactly what kind of man this kid was going to become. Growing up in the nearby town of O'Donnell, Dan wasn't raised with any sense of entitlement about his size. His family ran a small grocery store, and from the time he could carry bags, he was working. By the age of 10, he was hauling grain and doing construction work alongside grown men twice his age. The neighbors noticed immediately. They started calling him the Big 'Un, and it stuck, not because of anything he forced, but because of what he simply was. By 12 years old, Dan had already hit 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. Some local toughs tried to test him, thinking size was just a number. They learned otherwise. But what those early years really built wasn't a fighter, it was a protector. Dan never looked for confrontation, he ended it. High school took him to Texas Military Institute, where he played football with the kind of controlled ferocity that earned him a scholarship to Sul Ross State University. At 6'4" and 275 by then, he was impossible to miss on the field. Professional football teams were already circling, but something else got to him first. The drama club needed someone to move heavy props for a production of Arsenic and Old Lace. They called Dan. He showed up expecting to push furniture around and ended up getting handed a small role when someone didn't show. That was it. That one accidental night on stage flipped a switch that never turned back off. He changed his major from English to theatre and never looked back. The football offers came and went. Dan Blocker had found something that mattered more. Before Hoss Cartwright ever rode across the Ponderosa, Dan Blocker was riding through something far darker. After college, he was drafted into the US Army, and the Army quickly discovered that outfitting a man of his size was its own logistical challenge. It took a full month just to find boots that fit him, but once equipped, Blocker was deployed to Korea, and by Christmas of 1951, he was stationed near Chowan, North Korea, serving with the 179th Infantry Regiment as a combat infantry sergeant. What he faced there was brutal and relentless. Pork Chop Hill, the frozen trenches, the constant artillery, the sleepless weeks where survival felt like the only victory on the table. For nearly 7 months, Blocker fought in some of the most intense close-quarters combat of the entire Korean War. The men in his unit knew that having a soldier of his size, calm and resolve nearby meant something, not because of intimidation, but because of steadiness. One night, in the chaos of a firefight, one of his fellow soldiers went down and couldn't move. Blocker didn't calculate the risk. He charged into the open, pulled his comrade to safety, and came back wounded himself. That act earned him a Purple Heart, which he accepted quietly and rarely spoke about. What the war did to his inner life, though, was something he carried loudly. Dan came home a changed man. He became one of the most outspoken critics of military intervention in his era, condemning the use of napalm specifically, and speaking publicly against the kind of force he had watched destroy lives on both sides of the line. For a television cowboy whose bread and butter was shooting bad guys, this made him quietly radical, and he didn't care. Back home and newly married to his college sweetheart, Dulphia Parker, Dan had his sights on a doctorate. He enrolled at UCLA, moved the family to California, and genuinely planned to become a professor. Hollywood had other plans. Casting agents noticed him almost immediately. In the late 1950s, Westerns weren't just popular, they owned American television, and here was a man who looked like he had been sculpted specifically for the genre. The offers started small: bit parts in Gunsmoke, Colt 45, Have Gun to Travel, Maverick. He took them partly for the money and partly because the craft kept pulling at him. In 1957, he landed a meaningful role in The Restless Gun that actually got people's attention. Then came a recurring role as Tiny Boodinger in Cimarron City, a lovable, comedically gifted ranch hand that let him show what he could really do with warmth and timing. The industry took note. Then came Bonanza, and everything changed. What audiences saw in Hoss Cartwright was innocence, muscle, and a heart that couldn't hold a grudge if it tried. What most of them didn't know was that the man playing him held a master's degree in theater, had read more philosophy than most academics, and was quietly drawing from an 18th century Quaker missionary named Stephen Grillet to shape the character. Grillet's most famous words, "Do all the good you can, to all the people you can, in all the ways you can," became Dan's internal compass for Hoss. Every time the character showed patience when others might have snapped, or forgave someone who didn't deserve it, that was intentional. That was Dan reaching into something real. Behind the cameras, the bond between Dan, Lorne Greene, and Michael Landon was genuine in a way that's rare in Hollywood. Dan served as best man at Michael Landon's wedding to Lynn Noe. These weren't co-workers pretending to be a family 8 hours a day, they actually were one. And yet, Dan was deeply ambivalent about the fame itself. He held no illusions. In one of the most quietly devastating things he ever said publicly, he looked at his own success and called it what it was. Let's face it, I sold out for money. Not bitter, just honest. In the early 1960s, Bonanza's production took the cast and crew on location to the American South, a region still burning with the tension of racial segregation. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, but in plenty of hotels, restaurants, and venues, nothing had changed. When the Bonanza crew arrived at their hotel, the management made it clear that their black team members would not be accommodated. The room went quiet. Dan Blocker did not go quiet. He announced without hesitation that if everyone wasn't welcome, then nobody was staying. The entire cast and crew walked. No debate, no committee, no waiting to see what the network would say. In that moment, Dan wasn't performing moral courage, he was just being himself. He explained his worldview plainly in a 1964 interview. "I hate a bully worse than anything. I'm a big man. I don't like fights, but if I see a 180-pound guy beating on a 130-pound guy, you can damn well bet I'll take care of the big guy in a hurry." His size was never a source of pride for Dan. It was a tool, and tools exist to be used for something. By 1970, Dan Blocker had had enough of being recognized. Not of acting, not of Bonanza, just of the complete erosion of private life that came with being one of the most recognizable faces in the country. A vacation to the Yucatan became a public spectacle. A walk through any American city turned into a crowd event. Even his children couldn't have a normal day without cameras and strangers closing in. He had read an article in National Geographic about the Swiss lake country, the deep blues of Lake Como, Lake Maggiore, and Lake Lugano, and something about it spoke to him. The family moved. In Switzerland, Bonanza aired in German. Nobody recognized him in the grocery store. His kids thrived in international schools. Dan could sit by a lake and just breathe. When rumors spread back home that he was fleeing financial trouble, he dismissed them cleanly. Bonanza had made him comfortable. His decision wasn't about money, it never was with Dan. He had co-owned the Ponderosa steakhouse chain, had residuals stacking up, and wasn't hurting. He simply wanted a life that belonged to him. In the spring of 1972, Dan Blocker was diagnosed with gallstones, uncomfortable but common. The surgery to remove his gallbladder was considered a routine procedure, the kind of procedure that doctors performed regularly with minimal concern. The operation appeared to go well. His family exhaled. Then came the pulmonary embolism, a blood clot, sudden and catastrophic. On May 13, 1972, Dan Blocker died at Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood, California, at age 43. The grief that hit the entertainment world was immediate and overwhelming. Fan letters flooded the network, tributes came from political figures, fellow actors, and ordinary people who felt they had lost someone they genuinely knew. In a way, they had. One story that circulated in the aftermath said that his casket had to be a piano box, that no standard casket could contain a man of his size. It's a story that has passed through decades of Bonanza fandom as both funny and strangely fitting. But it isn't true. Dan Blocker was buried in a standard casket at Woodlawn Cemetery in Santa Monica, California. The piano box is a legend, born from the love people had for him and their instincts to make his story as big as the man himself. He would have probably laughed at it. When production resumed for Bonanza's 14th season, Michael Landon faced an impossible task. He sat down and rewrote the season premiere from scratch, quietly, painfully, stripping out all the plot lines that had been built around Hoss and replacing them with something else, something built on absence. Landon's choice was deliberate and devastating. He decided not to explain where Hoss was. No death scene, no farewell episode, just a dining room table with one fewer person at it, and a family that moved through their scenes with a weight that didn't need dialogue to be understood. The grief was real. He let it show. On set, cast and crew who had spent 14 years working alongside Dan Blocker found themselves navigating something that didn't feel like a production anymore. It felt like a household that had lost someone. NBC tried to adapt. They moved Bonanza from its iconic Sunday night slot, where it had dominated for years, to Tuesday nights, where it went head-to-head with ABC's Movie of the Week. Films like Brian's Song and Ben-Hur pulled viewers away in numbers the show couldn't recover from. Ratings dropped. The magic the early seasons had carried was gone, and everyone knew it. In 1973, after 14 seasons, NBC cancelled Bonanza. Dan had seen it coming. Years earlier, in interviews, he had spoken plainly about the math, the sheer number of episodes, the rising production costs, the shifting audience. He knew nothing lasted forever. He just didn't know it would end with him. Dirk Blocker grew up in the shadow of something enormous, not just his father's physical size, but his presence, the way rooms changed when Dan walked into them, the way strangers felt entitled to pieces of him in public, the way a man who deserved peace never quite got enough of it. Dirk chose a different path, character acting, the kind of work where you disappear into the role rather than becoming a brand. He watched what fame cost his father and made a quiet decision to keep his own life smaller, more his own. But what Dirk confirmed, speaking now from the distance of decades, is what many fans had long felt without being able to name it, that Dan Blocker was not performing goodness. He wasn't playing a role when he walked off that hotel or charged into enemy fire for a wounded soldier, or quoted a Quaker missionary to explain why Hoss never gave up on people. That was the man, completely and without apology. The gentleness was real, the anger at injustice was real, the discomfort with fame was real, and the grief of losing him, felt by a son who still carries it, is as real as anything that ever aired on Sunday night television. Dan Blocker lived 43 years and left behind something that has lasted more than 50. That's not luck. That's character.